I've had some guests come on my show, and the way they have promoted has been so robust. They've made it such a, oh, just go back to my podcast episode on this or check out my book. That becomes the focal point and a distraction rather than something serving the listener.
Most hosts never achieve the results they hoped for. They're falling short on listenership and monetization, meaning their message isn't being heard and their show ends up costing them money. This podcast was created to help you grow your listenership and make money while you're at it. Get ready to take notes. Here's your host, Adam Adams.
What's up, podcaster? It's your host, Adam Adams, and I am joined with a friend of yours. Y'all remember, we've got Julie Hawley, and back by popular demand, absolutely. Julie, had you worked with, I'm struggling to think of it, has really been a whole year.
It's been a year.
Wow.
And this is so exciting to come full circle and to come back.
Crazy.
An entire year after working with Grow Your Show, which I love.
Yeah, mind-boggling, a whole year. So last year, when we started doing this, we did basically 3 months worth of, I think it was weekly episodes. And we went through Julie's journey, and I had a lot of people, like genuinely, including my own mother. I had a lot of people say, those episodes with Julie Hawley are my favorite. And some people would say your solo episodes are my favorite, my solos. But if they didn't, they would usually say the banter, the connection that you have with Julie, like the way that she adds on top of things, the way that she doesn't need to self-promote what she's doing. It makes me like really engaged in those episodes. She always has something to add to you, and the really lack of the ego, if you will, that some podcast guests come with. So I've had so many people appreciate who you are. What I love is Julie reached out and she mentioned she would be open to doing that again. And I was excited about it because that's one of my listeners. That's one of you listening. One of your favorite things is hearing these episodes with Julie. So we've got her back. Welcome, Julie Hawley. And she actually has an idea for a topic that we should talk about. So I'll turn it over to you and let you introduce that, and let's get started.
I'm so excited to be back. I just have to say, listener, thank you. Because Adam would send me these messages, and from you, he'd be like, oh my gosh, this listener just let me know this. And remember, when we're on this side of the mic or this side of the screen, we don't always know that we're reaching you. But when you reach out and let the hosts know, and then when the host generously reaches out and lets the guest know that it's making an impact, it's just the most beautiful, magical thing in the world. So I just want to say thank you, listener. I value you. And I'm so excited when I threw this idea out to Adam. I'm like, Adam, I think we should do it again. It was so much fun and I'm missing it. And well, actually, I want to pick your brain because I mean, I might be a seasoned podcaster at this point, but I still want to grow, and there's no end to growing. And so today I've got a topic for you that is going to help. If you listener I'm trying to decide if I want to launch a podcast, or if you're a listener that is really highly experienced, I am absolutely confident that this topic is going to be very relevant to your journey. You guys ready for it?
I'm ready.
Are you? Okay.
I think the listener's ready.
Are you ready, listener? I hope on the edge of your seat, because we're talking about self-promoting. The very thing that you were just saying, like, yeah, they like that, Julie, that you don't have an ego and that you're not constantly self-promoting. And so it's really quite funny that I'm like, let's talk about self-promotion.
Opening up a light for me. So let's explore self-promotion real quick. Julie, is self-promotion good or bad?
Oh, okay. So we're going to start on the superficial basic.
Yeah, is it a good thing or is it a bad
thing? I'm going to say great. I think self-promotion is great. Like, nobody knows what you're doing if you don't tell them. One of my best friends says, closed mouths don't get fed. And so if we don't open our mouth, if we don't share, people don't know what we're doing, but then we don't want to be gross about it.
Yeah. So, okay. So in general, self-promotion is a positive thing.
Definitely.
And give me 2 reasons why it's positive. Give me a reason for you and give me a reason for your listener. Why is self-promotion positive?
I'll start with the listener by saying they then know, wow, this could help me in my life, or it could give me an idea. Maybe it's entertaining, but it's going to amplify their life and benefit them. And think about this. This episode right now is coming back because we self-promoted, right? These episodes that we created before, and listener, you reached out and now we're serving you again. I mean, it definitely serves everybody well. And for me, it provides feedback. I'll give a few reasons, like provides feedback. And when we have that feedback coming back from other people, I don't know a human that isn't grateful for that and isn't a little excited to get back to recording the next episode or the next 10 or whatever, right? And so it fuels us and it drives our business. There is a behind the scenes, and that's not bad either.
So let's talk about being a guest on somebody else's show.
Okay.
And or having a guest on your show and putting them in the same seat. So you're on someone else's show. Should we or should we not find a way to let the listener of that other person's show know about something that could also serve us? Like our own podcast being an example, or our own coaching service, for example. Should we do it on somebody else's podcast? And if so, how?
I think that there is a fine line. And I've had some guests come on my show, and the way they have promoted has been so robust. And it's only happened a couple of times because I screen my guests fairly well. But they've monopolized it and made it such a, oh, just go back to this, go back to this, go back to this, and go back to my podcast episode on this, or check out my book or this. And so that becomes the focal point. And that to me is like, that's gross, because that becomes a distraction rather than something serving the listener. So when a guest is on the show and it's serving the listener, it's that genuine aside. And I always ask guests on my show, I'm like, hey, is there anything you do want to promote? Anything we should highlight throughout our conversation? Like, I'm getting that from them. So we can do that along the way in a very organic way without having to be like neon light in your face. But definitely at the end of the episode, for sure, there should be a place, in my opinion.
So I want to talk about seeding. Julie, do you know what I mean by seeding?
Like SEED, like plant a seed?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I mean, I feel like I'm on a game show right now, and that can I do that? Can I just pretend that I'm on a game show okay, seeding for 500. I would say that seeding is like,
wait, if this is Jeopardy, remember you have to put this into a form of a question.
Oh gosh, dang, I did not watch enough game shows. I watched The Price is Right growing up. So that's my problem. Okay, what is dropping nuggets throughout my conversation so that at the end, when I do a big reveal of this is where you can find me and get this resource, they are going to want to jump in and pick up their phone and opt in?
Yes, that is right. What is it?
Do I get $500?
Indeed. I don't know. Maybe the listener can say if we need to give that or not. So let's talk about seeding for a sec, and if it can be positive or negative and how we might do it. So Julie, before we talk about the rest of seeding, let me ask you, what's the real reason you wanted to talk about self-promotion on this episode? Is it because you, Julie Hawley, are struggling with it? You think you need to do more of it? Or is it because you think that you got it perfect and you really could teach the listener today? Why is the reason that you brought it up?
Well, I'm so glad that you asked, Adam. I have this dialed in. I just want to get on a soapbox. No. In all reality, I really want to grow my show. I'm 40,000 downloads away from 200,000 downloads. And I'm looking at that as like, I really want to do that. And since I'm working with the right production crew that grow your show, like so powerful. I love the team. They're amazing. And since we've been collaborating for the last year, I now feel empowered to do that in a way I did not feel before. And so now I'm thinking it's a mutual effort. It's not just, okay, you guys go take care of this, myself and my assistant. Like there are things that we could be doing that are complementary. And I really want to get to that 200,000 threshold before the end of the year. And so I'm thinking, what is a gracious, not gross way of reaching out to people, either directly through messages or ways I can bring it up on my own personal social media accounts and such that would really draw attention to it, but not in that flamboyant, like in your face way. And we've seen it. Listener, you have seen it. We have all seen it. I think I've done it at times. I'm guilty of it from time to time.
For the person listening, I'm processing right now. What has Julie said? What does she seem like she's worried about? What does she seem like she's thinking about? What is her main goal? What is the why behind the why? And I've been processing this and I'm trying to come up with a few ideas that'll work for Julie Holly. And I'm realizing that they will work for me and they will work for you, the listener, as well. So let's dive into a couple of things that Julie might already be doing, or she might be able to add to what she's doing. And you listening, you may be doing one or two of these, and you may learn two or three new ones. So let's talk about what can we do for better self-promotion. So I want to start with the seeding, since we've already mentioned it, and we have a garden. And what do we do with a garden? You don't just look at the soil and say, what the heck? Where are my tomatoes? Where are my strawberries? Where are my carrots? Or whatever you are trying to grow, your potatoes. You don't just look at soil and wonder where that is. You have to freaking plant the seed first. And you also have to nurture. You have to water it. You might even have to put fertilizer on it. You might even have to make sure it's in the right sunlight. So you nurture it. Later on, when it starts to grow, you may be forced, and I did this with one of my plants recently, and it hurt my feelings at first, but it did actually help the plant, and that's called pruning. So as it's coming out of the ground, there's a shoot that's coming off of your plant that may be dying, may be going in the wrong direction. It might be going sideways instead of up, or it may be taking away too much nutrients from the rest of the plant, even though there's no fruit on it at all. So you have to do what's called pruning. You actually have to cut it back sometimes. So when you're thinking about this in terms of planting seeds on your podcast, and even on other people's podcast episodes, on when you're a guest, on your podcast, what you can do is drop and plant these seeds that you do serve your avatar. So for example, my perfect avatar, my main avatar, because I've got two, I've got a primary and a secondary. My main avatar is somebody who's had a podcast for a year or two and is just not getting the results that they wanted. There's a main person that I want to serve. I have got a secondary avatar who comes to this show and listens to the show. And they are somebody who wants to launch a podcast and never go through the trouble of what my primary avatar had to go through. So I've got this person who's been doing it a year or two, and they feel like they're beating their head against the wall. And then I've got the secondary avatar that never wants to beat their head against the wall. They just want to learn it now. They want to offload the hard stuff now. They just want to start it with a team that has done this before and has a track record. So those are the two people that I've got. So when I want to plant seeds, one of the things that I will do, one thing, and write this down actually, Julie, will you write it down in our chat box?
Yes, I will.
Okay. And then it'll be there for both of us. And for the listener, you'll do your best to find a way to write this down. It is that you will use stories of people you're currently working with. And what that means is you'll mention, like, I'll record an episode and I might mention Julie Holly. I might mention my mom. I might mention this other guy or this other gal that my team serves. And what that seed does, because it's not at fruition in the beginning, what it really is trying to do is social proofing. So if I just mention a story about somebody that I have worked with or helped in their podcast, for example, so another way to say number one is social proof. And what my listener, that's you, when you're listening and you hear me talk about somebody that I served, you can say to yourself, Adam does this. This is what Adam does for a living. Maybe I could call him. So using stories about people that you currently are working with for social proofing, underneath that, we can add to it still as part one, is when using that story, we have to remember who is the hero and who is the guide. And when talking about the hero and the guide, and Julie, to our listener, this is the self-promotion that sounds disgusting. It's disgusting. It's gross. It feels icky when we talk about ourselves as the hero, because we are not the hero. We're just the guide. So we got to remember to go back to the Star Wars trilogy, or I guess it's more than a trilogy now, but we got to go to the Star Wars and we got to think about who is the hero of that whole movie, who are all the supporting characters of that movie, and who is the one guide. And the hero is Luke Skywalker. The guide is Yoda. And if Yoda wanted to tell a story and he was like, I'm such a badass, I helped this guy named Luke go from nothing to something. I'm amazing. You should work with me too. then it feels icky. If Yoda told a story about Skywalker is the hero, if Yoda told that same story, but he made sure that Skywalker was the hero of the story. Look at this guy, went from nothing. This is what he wanted. This is what he was struggling with. This is what he saw other people to do. He could mention he was an orphan. He could mention that he lived with his aunt and uncle. He could mention that he was poor. He could mention that he lived in the middle of nowhere. And he could mention that he wanted to achieve greatness, but he didn't know how. And Yoda would just mention that the Force is what helped him. The Force is the thing that helped Luke. And Luke is still going to be the person who is the hero of the story. The Force supported him. And Yoda's involvement was just introducing him to the Force because the Force is amazing. So put that to me. So I could say, I'm a badass. I helped this one person. You should hire me too. Or I could say, this one person went through this. They went through this. They struggled with that. They wanted this and they didn't yet have a podcast. So we helped them grow the podcast. We helped them get some of the hard stuff off. And then they launched it. And look what's happening with them now that they have that show, now that they have the Force with them, now that they have their podcast up and running. They're getting more clients because of the podcast. They're getting this and being able to have more time freedom. They're going on more bike rides with their family. They're doing this fun thing. They're getting more income. They're serving more clients. They're happier. They're healthier, whatever it is. And it's because of the podcast that they started. Granted, you listening, you know that I had some involvement to that, but it doesn't come across as icky and gross and disgusting if I'm talking about Julie and what she was looking for and how her podcast served her. Because then you want to be like Julie. Because you want to be like Luke Skywalker. You want to have the Force. You want to save the world or other worlds. You want to get the girl or the guy or both of them. Who knows? But you want to achieve these things. And this is what this person did. This is what Julie achieved. This is what Skywalker achieved. It took a podcast. It took the Force. I was just a guide. I was just there to show some of this. And I don't want to toot my own horn or else it's going to come across as icky and gross. So Julie, when you are on your own podcast and when you're on other people's podcast, are you already finding ways of just planting the seed? And are you making sure that when you do it, that you're allowing the person you're talking about to be the hero of the story and you are just a guide?
So I love everybody else being the hero. This is an interesting thing. And I think there's going to be a demographic of the listeners that this is going to resonate with. So I can promote other people. I can share the heck out of every single, that's why I can authentically be like, oh my gosh, I'm so grateful to be working with you and your company. It's revolutionary. It's so amazing. And it's all sincere because I love promoting. Everybody knows that if Julie Holly is behind them, I always say I'm 200% in or 100% out. So actually, maybe this is more of a therapy session now, because I'm realizing as I'm saying this, but I think this is really relatable, is that I also have episodes that are just me and they're mindset episodes. And it's all about a concept. And I think that's where I really struggle with that self-promotion because I have amazing guests. I only bring on really amazing people. So I'm confident in promoting who they are and what they're doing in the world. And I know my mindset episodes are really powerful, but I have a hard time self-promoting those type of episodes. But now I can see that I should really be lacing those episodes up in a different way and presenting them in a better way.
Here's our way to do this. There's this website that we can go to, and it helps us understand what is our perfect avatar wanting to know. And what you do is you go into this website, you put in whatever your field is. It could be podcasting. It could be real estate. It could be mindset. It could be nursing or whatever. It could be about building these potato bombs or anything else. You go into this website and you type in what field you're in, and it will go and find out what people are looking for in search engines, what gets typed a lot. So I might say podcasting, and it might generate a bunch of different options for me and ideas for me based on what strong search history underneath podcasting. And some of the things that may come up, it might say, how do I monetize? Or how soon can I monetize? It may say, how do I start a podcast? What mic should I use? And so on. And I can look through and I can figure out which ones are more impactful. Now, you don't have to use this particular website. You could actually go and ask your avatar. So I could ask Julie, I could ask another client, I could ask somebody who calls on a discovery call or a potential listener who listens to the show and reaches out. And I could ask you, what are you looking for? What do you want? What do you need? What are you going through? And when I have that information, this is what I can do. I can create an episode, whether it's a solo episode or an interview episode, both can work. I've done this in the past where it was an interview because I didn't feel like I was the person who had enough of that value. And so I brought somebody else on who had more of that value. So for example, I feel like I have a whole bunch of value to pour into any podcaster as far as it goes for strengthening the audio experience. I feel like I'm really, really, really good at that. One of the best
you are really great
in the world. Honestly, I feel like I'm top notch at this one thing. However, I feel like I'm way below where a lot of people are for the video experience. If you're using different camera angles, if you're trying to set up your studio for lighting and background and other things, I feel like I just know some of those things. So if I went on to this website or asked a client to tell me what they want to know, or a potential client or whatever, they would say something like, I want to know how to set up my video studio. How do I get multiple camera angles? I got some knowledge about this because I've talked about it before. I've learned it. I've asked it before, but I don't do it. So in that case, I would bring in an expert whose only thing was video. And then I would ask all the questions that my perfect avatar wanted to know if they were asking about that. And then here's what I would do after. Step one, you find out what they are looking for, however you do that. Step two, you record an episode with that value, either solo or interview. And then step three is time for promotion. So here's an idea of something that I did a long, long time ago. It was with my previous podcast, and it was episode 242. I remember clearly. This is my most downloaded episode ever. I think I had thousands extra downloads for that episode than I did for any other.
Wow.
And so what I would do is, because it was information, it was content that my perfect avatar really wanted to know, I promoted that episode whenever I was on somebody's stage. Whenever it came up on a different podcast episode, I would do what's called a callback. And I'll just tell you what this content was, because Julie, you've got a real estate podcast, and maybe this is more relevant to you. So I did an interview with somebody, and he was a really good expert at knowing how to find a good, solid market for you to invest in. And here's the issue for real estate investing. Markets are all cyclical. That means they go in cycles. And some markets are on an upward trajectory and some are on a downward. And the reason why is because taxes are different across the nation and other laws are different across the nation. And so weather, like outside, is different across the nation. And so there's places like, for example, maybe we could talk about New York City and Los Angeles, where there's typically been a ton of people that lived. And recently, as we're recording, both places have had mass exodus. They've had a lot of people that have been moving out for a few years. So their population gets smaller each year by 1 or 2 or 3%. And then there's other markets, and we can talk about different markets maybe in Florida and Texas, because as we're recording, Idaho and Utah and Florida and Texas and Colorado are 5 examples of places where most of the main cities have been growing by 1 or 2% year over year for the last few years in a row. And then there's other places in the nation that it's just stagnant. It's not really growing. It's not really shrinking. Maybe one year is up 1 or 2 or 3%, and the next year is down 1 or 2 or 3%. And the next year is about the same. It's not really growing. It's not really shrinking. But you can find some markets that have been growing 1% year over year. And that makes it a good reason to say that it could be a strong market. And then there's tons of other things about schools and crime. And there's websites that you can find out some of this information. And I wasn't the expert. So I brought in this guy who is probably a genius. I'd have to say he's probably a genius. He's a very math-oriented, scientific-oriented person, data-driven. And he's a geek about that stuff. When many of us aren't really geeks about that, but we're happy to know it. we're happy to learn it from someone like him who was geeky enough to like pull in the information on his own. So it was something that I wasn't very good at, but I found him and we had a conversation where we talked for like maybe an hour before we even recorded. And then we figured out all the steps to it and all of the links that we needed to share in the whole process of being able to find a solid market to be going up so you can ride the wave rather than ride the crash. And that's literal ride the crash because it could be a market crash in some place where people are moving out or the schools are bad or whatever. So he and I had this conversation. It was a longish episode, but a very valuable episode. And I remember it being something that when I would speak about real estate investing in Utah and Los Angeles and Boston and Dallas and wherever else I would go, a lot of people were like nervous about finding a good market. How do we know where a good place is? So here's what I would do. It didn't feel like, quote, self-promotion. It felt like support. And that's a thing that we've got to find a way to change in our mindset.
Right.
So first and foremost, I wasn't thinking like, man, I really want everybody to listen to my podcast. I wasn't really thinking from that lens. I was more thinking from the lens of a lot of the people that are in this field want to know this question. And so why don't I try to find a way to get the best answer to that question? And then when I get the answer to that question, I go in and I go and tell everybody when that comes up. So different times I'd be like on somebody's stage, maybe on my own answering questions, or I would see people asking the question, or I would be on a panel. And on the panel, somebody would raise their hand and ask the whole group of us, like, how did you find that market? How do you know if it's a good market? And I would say, hey, there's one resource. It's about an hour and a half long podcast, and it goes through every detail and every link. If you want to really geek out on it, I'll give you the podcast episode. You just find this show and go to this episode number. And it technically, I guess it's self-promotion in a way. But I didn't ever feel like it was self-promotion. I felt like it was the best way to serve them. I would say, hey, let me start there. So I would go first, maybe. And then I would say something to the effect of, there's a lot of information that you want to know to look at if you want to get a solid market. Because it could have a headwind, it could have a tailwind. And you want to make sure that it's going to bring you to where you want and it's going to help you so that you get more of the value. And then I would mention headwinds and tailwinds. And I would say, you're trying to go 300 miles an hour and you have a 100-mile-an-hour tailwind, you're really going 400. You're trying to go 300 and you have a headwind and you're really going 200. Or I think that's the right math.
Yep.
So then I would mention it will be really hard for anyone on this panel to give you all of the things, but there is a resource. I interviewed this one person on my podcast, and he gave this, and that in a really great way. So if that's what you're looking for is a strong market, you who raised your hand and anyone else, a good resource, if you have an hour and 20 minutes, would be to go to my podcast, episode 242. And that was it.
I love that.
I would mention, like, does anyone on the panel want to talk about any particulars that you look at that supported them? And another thing is that I would frequently have 10-minute calls with my listener. And actually, for our listener today, they can go to callwithadam.com, 10-minute free call. We get on a quick call and I can pour into you.
That was some good self-promotion right there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the thing that happens on the calls is I try to give thousands of dollars of value. Anytime I get on a 10-minute call, it's not a sales pitch. It's just pouring in. And sometimes it leads to a client, like a client relationship. And other times it just supports that person to get to the next place. But on those calls back then, many times people would ask like, hey, should I invest in this new deal? They'll be like, should I invest in this new deal? And they might pick a market that is declining. Because here's the thing, going back to syndicators, and not all syndicators are created equally. And so some syndicators, they go to shitty markets because there's really good, cheap deals. And then they just can't perform anything because it has a headwind. And so I might hear on that call somebody who wants to be a passive investor who's just saying like, hey, I've got these guys in this area. Should I invest in it? And then I might say, the last time I checked that area was because back then when I was doing these more, Tulsa, Oklahoma was a bad market. So OKC was a good market, and Tulsa, which is just real close, was a bad market back then. So they might come and say, hey, should I do this one thing in this one city of Ohio? Should I do this one thing in this one city of Mississippi? Should I do this one thing in this one city of Oklahoma? And if I remember that it was a declining market, then I will say, ooh, last time that I looked at that, it was actually declining and people were moving out of that city. And they had this thing because they were building so many properties right now, and everything is only 80% full today. And then they're building all of these other properties and they're only growing 1% year over year. That where there is a estimation, it's called an attrition rate, but there's an estimation in the future, 3 to 6 years, that instead of being 80% occupancy, things are going to be more close to 70% occupied. And so you're probably going to lose money if you invest in that deal. But I want you to be armed with all of the stuff that you need to look at strong markets. And so you could do some of this on your own. Maybe you need to listen to episode 242 from my show. So it's a quick 10-minute call. And on that call, I would just tell them about it. So how do we talk about Julie? Okay, Julie's thinking like, how do I get people to do this? So remember, step 1 was figure out what people are wanting. Step 2 was to record what they want. And step 3 is to tell people about what they want in a way that comes from you wanting to help them, not necessarily to grow your podcast or your business or whatever. And so that is like the formula for that. And Julie, I feel like I've been talking for a minute. So do you have any questions on that or
it's only been 1 minute. No, I love that. And okay, so based off of coaching with you last year, and those coaching calls are available, listener, on the podcast. Like we did them live and really diving down into my avatar. So I feel like I've laid a good foundation for everything that you are saying. And this is why I knew it was time to ask you this very question as to self-promotion. So a couple of months ago, I created this episodes 365, because I'm like, 365, there are 365 days in the year, like something I can personally remember, like you can remember 242, episode 242. But I'm thinking 365. And since I am catering and trying to serve passive investors, I know I'm like diving into my avatar, not just all passive investors, but I've really been trying to dive into my avatar's needs. And so I started creating these episodes, and it's like 365A, 365B, 365C, and just so that they're all clustered together. So then if they start to binge, then they can have all those questions start like, oh, it's quick, shorter episodes, and I'm getting my questions answered. They're more educational. And just, I like that they're all clustered together, and I can just say 365, but I haven't been saying it enough.
Yeah.
And so I can hear so many missed opportunities just based off of everything that you shared in that 1 minute.
That 1 minute?
That 1 minute was just like
giant monologue.
Time stops. It was like the most amazing 1 minute, because my mind is like pinging around like, oh my gosh. I'm like, can we do another call? We got to do more, because like synergy, just like getting the idea, taking it to the next level. It's one thing to even have the anchor content. It's one thing to go through the work of like identifying your avatar and building it out. Then there's a whole nother element as to meeting their needs. This is that final element. Like, okay, great. You know who they are. You know how to meet their needs, but they aren't going to know who you are if you don't share who you are, if you don't promote who you are, if you don't promote how you can serve them in a powerful way, and that you have something that's going to help them with all of their needs.
Yeah. So with that in mind, you mentioned earlier, I might be misquoting you, but only slightly, I love promoting others, but it's hard to promote myself. So I'm hearing you say, I can be passionate about helping my listener. And there are some resources out there that I have met that can support them. And I love doing that. I like to play that matchmaker. I want my listener to have this good resource. And I'm happy to see the resource also making money, and grateful for me to make the connection as well. So now it's like thinking about, how do we promote ourselves? How do we connect the listener to ourselves? And part of it is mindset. I think part of it is just, how do we think about it? So going back to what I mentioned earlier, when I was promoting episode 242, I wasn't thinking like, I really need people to listen to my podcast. I really want more downloads. that may have been in the back of my mind, but it wasn't the strongest thing for sure. It was more like, this is a common question. My listener needs to know it, or they could be screwed. They could lose so much money if they don't have that resource. So I would go into it with thinking, I want to help them. And you've got 365 ABCD. And so you can come in and you can think about the listener from your heart. Not that, hey, this is my episode. This is my podcast. This has something to do with my business. Not necessarily there, but more to the extent of, what does my listener need to know? What do they need to gain? And you can start talking about that in other episodes now. You can talk about that when you're on my podcast, which you just did, 365, ABCD.
I just self-promoted, by the way. High five for me.
So with that in mind, let's just say you are on somebody else's podcast and they ask you a question about passive investing. You could say, about a month ago, or about a week ago, or about a year ago, I thought through that process of podcasting and I put it into a bunch of short different episodes on my show. One of the things that was on there talked about, let's just say, vetting an operator. That might be on there. Who knows? One of them shows how to vet your operator, how to make sure your operator's going to do good things. And you could say, I think that's one of the most important things. Of course, on the podcast, I mention all of the things, but if you're asking me to share this, that's more than an hour's worth of content. That would take a long time to go through it all. But one of the things that I think the listener needs to know is just how to vet an operator. And a couple of the takeaways from episode 365, I think it's 365B. On 365B, and I'm talking about them vetting an operator, making sure that they're not going to get in with the wrong person so that they don't lose money. We went through a whole bunch of questions. I'm going to give you 3 of them that I can think of right off the top of my head because I don't have my notes in front of me right now. And then you just share a couple of things and you say they can listen to 365B for more of that information. Now, you don't even have to say, listen to all A, B, C, D, E, F, G, because if they go to B and they like it, they're probably going to listen to the rest.
Yeah.
So just by seeding, just by planting the seed in their heart, just so that they know that that resource is available, it could be really beneficial for them to take the next step. Other ways to self-promote that aren't icky is to talk about calls with you. I put callwithadam.com. It's a 10-minute free call. And if you don't mention it, I think this is the best way to say it. If I don't say it, then the listener doesn't know.
Yeah.
And the problem is, I love my listener. Like, I mean, I might not know them
I do
that
too.
intimately, but I do care for who they are. And I'm trying to give good content for them because I want to support the world when it comes to podcasting. So when I think of like the content that I'm doing, the efforts that I'm putting, I want to make sure that that listener like can take the next step for them.
Yeah.
And sometimes a free 10-minute call is a first next step. It's a baby step. They're not committing to paying anything. I mean, we're not even probably going to talk about them paying for anything on that call. It's just going to be support. The thing is, if the listener of my podcast and of your podcast, if the listener of your show never, ever schedules a 10-minute call, you can pretty much guess that they might never even take a first step toward real estate investing. If a listener on my show never schedules a call with me, ever, there is a good chance, not to be rude or mean or scary or salesy, there's a good chance, honestly, that they might never start and never have a podcast, or that they might continue a podcast that is never growing. And I don't want that for them. I don't want them to not have a good show. If they're putting the effort and the time into what they're doing now, it should amount to something. Calls, clients, advertisers, or whatever. It should amount to something. So here's the important part, knowing that they would probably never take a first step if the first step wasn't easy. So for you, you ought to let them know about your podcast. Because if you're on another person's podcast, 100% of those listeners listen to podcasts.
Right.
And so it can be easy for them to find you. And it's probably within your niche. In my case, mine's not always my niche because I don't always interview podcast coaches, just podcast hosts. For you, it may be your niche. So there's just a few things that you can do, that you can follow to be able to bring this up. One of the things is mindset. One of the takeaways today is our mindset around what self-promotion means. It's really less about self-promotion and more about support.
Mm-hmm.
It is real that they either might never invest in real estate, or they might invest in real estate in the wrong way or with the wrong person and lose money. And so, Julie, if you really care about them, like, it can harm them if you don't promote that episode or that collection of episodes. It can harm them if they don't get on a call with you. It can harm them if they go into the wrong market. It can harm them if they don't do their due diligence on their person. Mm. So if you care, you have to be passionate about getting them to call you versus scared. Mm-hmm. Am I coming across wrong? Am I self-promoting too much? So if you love them and you want to support them, you got to get them to do whatever that next step is. And I will finish up today's episode by letting the listener know that we're going to do these calls once a month. Instead of once, it was once a week, but it's going to be once a month for the next year. And so I'm excited. You're going to be able to hear Julie more regularly. We're going to let her jump off. Please go down into the show notes and follow her links to her podcast, her company, see what she does and what she's about. And we'll continue to add value to you on next episodes. Thank you for listening. See you on the next episode. By the way, one way to ensure that you don't miss out on great content that we're producing on a regular basis is to make sure you're subscribed to the show. You need to be subscribed or following the Apple Podcast or wherever you listen to it in order not to miss all of that. And before I let you go, I need to mention, because a lot of people are asking, do you help? Can you help me with this? And the answer is yes. My company actually does it. It's called Grow Your Show. And you can find that at growyourshow.com. Our clients, they call us the easy button for podcaster because they simply have to record their episode. And they know that every single thing else is done for them. We sweat the hard stuff so you can be the star of your show. And if you would like help to make sure that we're editing and publishing and promoting and doing your social media, it's all in one place. And I think it's pretty affordable. You'll have to take a look for yourself. Just go to growyourshow.com and check us out. And by the way, I'll see you on the next episode.